Hey everybody, it's Mama Kay coming at you once again from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. And today I have the furthest person from Winnipeg that I could find for you to learn from. And thinking back, I'm like, where in the world did we meet? I thought it was at university or where was it? And he reminded me that no, it was during our time doing instrument testing and recruiting for a local music store. So yeah, we would tour around to different schools and get covered in spit and encourage kids to join band. So without further ado, special guest from far away, who are you?
Hi, I'm Dave Lisik, and I live in Wellington, New Zealand. And yesterday I went on the Google Maps and we figured out that it was 13,251 kilometers away from Winnipeg.
And you have got things going in the right direction there in regards to this insanity that we're going through in the world right now.
Yeah, that's right. We had 2 days in a row where we had no new cases. I think we're down under 150 active cases. So we're looking at maybe the end of the entire thing within the next week or so, where we literally are down to 0 active cases and no new cases. So
that's exciting times indeed. And I wanted to
story.
give a shout out for your Roots jacket today. Thank you for representing your home country. So well done, well done. So now, what do you do in New Zealand?
So I work at the New Zealand School of Music, which is at Victoria University of Wellington, which is the big university in the capital city. And I teach jazz composition and theory. So it's a reasonably big school, and it's a pretty luxurious kind of situation to have. We have 5 full-time jazz faculty, and I'm in charge of the jazz composition. So I teach undergrads. We have a post-grad year here, similar to Canada. The bachelor degree is a 3-year degree, a post-grad year, and then I supervise masters and doctoral students. And then on the side, sort of as a bit of a recruiting tool, but also sort of enrichment for the local scene, I'm the chair of the New Zealand Jazz Foundation, which runs a couple of different activities a year. One of them is the New Zealand Youth Jazz Orchestra, which is a sort of like an all-star band, or like an all-state band in America, or I think Manitoba has had the sort of the high school all-star jazz band for quite a few years now. Sort of that thing. We audition students from across the country, and they come together for a couple weeks a year, and then we get in usually an international guest artist to play solos with the band and to do a little bit of touring. And then the Jazz Foundation also runs sort of a Jamie Aebersold style summer jazz camp for a week. And we have the local university teachers as the combo tutors, and then usually bring in an international guest artist to teach at that as well. At least one, when we can afford it.
How long have you been there teaching?
So I came here at the beginning of 2010. So this is I'm in the middle of the first semester of my 11th year. And before that, I lived in Memphis, Tennessee for almost 7 years. That's where I did my doctorate, and then I got my first college teaching job in Memphis, which was very fortunate. But then when you teach high school, you can, which is kind of what I did when, the end of the 90s, when you teach high school, you can move to whatever city you want, and maybe you won't get the job, your ideal job immediately, but eventually you'll get something, because of course there are a lot of high schools and a lot of options. But when you want to teach college or university, you kind of have to go where the jobs are. So when you're working in jazz, you just assume, because you've probably seen the College Music Society's directory. I don't even know if they publish it hard copy anymore, but it was like the size of a gigantic phone book. And of course, the number of college music positions in the United States is huge. Thousands of universities that have music programs, and many, many hundreds that have jazz programs. So you just kind of assume that that's where you'll get a job. But then very randomly, this job came up in New Zealand, and and I was fortunate enough to beat out a bunch of people to get it. So, and it just happened to be at the right time, because if it had been 5 years earlier, 5 years later, it wouldn't have happened that way. But then, of course, you find yourself on the other side of the world for when it was very unexpected.
Well, and it's turned out quite nicely for you indeed. You've got lots of exciting things happening there. I believe I saw you have some sort of big release coming up, or has it been released already?
Yeah, I've got, well, 2 CDs are at the mastering guy right now. So I've been really fortunate in the last little while I'm primarily a composer, a trumpet player and a composer, but I've had a lot of really great people record my music. So in 2011, I started a jazz festival here at the university, like a high school jazz festival where 300 kids come and they all perform and are adjudicated, and the sort of the standard thing. And we were really fortunate to have that coincide with this recording project. I got a big grant to do a big band CD with the best jazz orchestra in Australia, which is in Sydney. They're called the Jazz Groove Mothership Orchestra. And so this big band CD I'd done previously, the trumpet soloist was Tim Haggins, who's one of my favorite trumpet players from New York. But so we called him first, and for logistical and sort of money reasons, it didn't quite work out. But then I was introduced to Alex Tipyagin, who's a Russian but American, moved to New York from Russia in about 1991, I think. But one of the absolute best jazz trumpet players in the world, plays in the Mingus Big Band and tours the world. So we were able to get him as the guest artist for our jazz festival, and then also the next week go to Sydney and use him for that recording. And so we became friends, and he's done about 10 different CD projects for me since then. So the most recent one, I've done 2 recordings with these 2 guys so far, Dave Kokoski, who's also a piano player in the Mingus Big Band, and Alex. They've done 2 CDs of duo recordings. Just a fun little project. I write the tunes and send them to them, and they record them in a studio in New York, and then just send me the tracks back, and then I mix them. And it's not that serious a project, but just kind of a fun little thing. But their playing is just miraculous. So the first one was called Bonnie and Clyde. So because there were 2 of them, I named all the tunes after famous duos. So one was Henson and Oz, Jim Henson and Frank Oz, and one was Bonnie and Clyde, of course, and then Rosencrantz and Guildenstern from Hamlet, and these different famous duos. So then for the second one, because there were 2 of them, I called it Joust, because it was sort of pitting the 2 players against each other. And so that's a CD that's coming out soon. As soon as it comes back from the mastering guy, I can get it online. And then another one, it took me 5 years to release. In fact, it was the last time I was in New York, because we had our first baby right in beginning of 2017. So that kind of puts a bit of a crimp in your travel plans. But I recorded a CD of music that I wrote with a quartet, and the drummer is Jeff Tane Watts. He's been my favorite drummer since I was about 12 years old. That was really the first small group jazz album that I heard, which was Wynton Marsalis live at Blues Alley, and he was the drummer, and he did a bunch of Wynton's recordings, and then was in Branford's band for about 20 some years. So to get something recorded with him was fantastic. And a friend of mine, trombone player who plays in the Vanguard Jazz Orchestra, Luis Bonilla, and then Donnie McCaslin, the tenor player, who's one of my absolute all-time favorite musicians, recorded. We've done 3 CDs together now. So that one took me 5 years to get mixed and edited and everything, but it's ready to go now. And so that'll be coming out
So
soon.
Where do people find the links for these recordings?
If you go to, everything is on Apple Music now.
Oh, so we just type in Dave Lisik, we should be able to find your stuff.
Yeah, or just my website, just davelisic.com. Everything's everything's up there. You can see what the covers look like, and then most of it is on YouTube, sort of for free, or Spotify, or a few of them are different. Like I did a CD a couple years ago with it was Alex Sipiagin, the trumpet player again, and it was his 7-piece group, and that was one of the most exciting ones, because Chris Potter, I think, is my absolute all-time favorite jazz musician and saxophone player, and he's recording on that one. But that one's not really under my own name; it's under Alex's name, and it just says it's called Relativity, music of Dave Lisik. But so you'd have to type in Alex Sipiagin, but
That's very exciting.
It's all out there.
So you're just a little busy.
What?
Said you're just a little bit busy.
Yeah, it's fun busy though.
So Dave, we're gonna go back.
It's kind of stuff that you'd want to be doing anyway. That's the cool thing about it. The best thing about my gig here is that it's 40% teaching and 40% research, which for me is writing music and making CDs. So it's just kind of like the best situation possible.
No kidding. Well, Dave, we're going to go way back in time. Dave, we're going to go way back to Baby Dave.
Okay.
We're going to find out, how in the world did you get there? So from Baby Dave, what was your musical journey? Take us through your education. How did it all happen for you?
Well, one of the things that I talk about a lot, and I think you may understand exactly how the level of the quality of the music education program where you live, but I think a lot of people take it for granted. Right? I think many people who are successful in music have parents who are successful. This is true with almost any discipline, right? People who are in movies had parents who were in that business, or people who did this type of high level business, they had parents who, or relatives, or somebody special who showed them the way, made it seem possible. But my parents aren't musicians, not musical at all. I make fun of my mom a little bit. She loves Anne Murray, and I don't know if you ever saw that Family Guy episode where Stewie and Brian kidnap Anne Murray.
No way.
You gotta check it out, because what was the famous song, the Snowbird song or whatever? Yeah. They're like sitting around listening to it, and they're both arguing about the meaning of and they're fighting about how beautiful it is, and they're crying, and there are rainbows and everything. It's just an absolute gem of an episode. But anyway, my parents weren't musical, so the fact that in kindergarten or first grade we had 4 music periods in a 6-day cycle or whatever it was, 40 minutes, right from the beginning. Well, that's a big deal. That's a bigger deal than people give it credit for. And then the idea that there's the band program. We kind of heard this a little bit when we were kids, or when we were in the band programs. Manitoba really has something special going on here. And you're like, that can't be true. There have to be places. This isn't that good. There have to be places where it's just like crushing it, and there really aren't. There really aren't. It's really, and it's because somebody decided. It was like the generation before us, or whoever it was, these people who were the senior statesmen of the band situation in Manitoba, 1 or 2 generations before us. A bunch of these American guys who came up.
Yep.
In the
Connie
60s,
Turners, the Ross Shaver, everybody like that, right?
Right, and they just decided to do it, right? Because they just as easily could have not decided to put that system in place the way it is. And the idea that Manitoba was the first place to have a government approved jazz curriculum, or just that pretty much every place has a band program and has a jazz program and has a choir program. Well, that doesn't exist everywhere. And so how do you have the opportunity to become good at anything if it's not the natural experience for the people around you, meaning your family or somebody who's there to influence you? You do it because it's part of the school system, and it has to be kind of across the board. Now, when I was in high school, I actually transferred. I was in the district to go to Shaftesbury High School, but I transferred to go to Oak Park High School because it had a stronger music program. That's where Gary Pollard was. He was my high school teacher, and just, fantastic. I was lucky because both my band teachers were trumpet players, so that probably was an added bonus. But
Where
it
did you
didn't
go
really
to
matter
elementary
where
school,
you went.
Dave? Where was your elementary school?
So I lived in um, half the year for kindergarten. I went to West Grove, which was in Westwood. No,
Right.
which was in Charleswood, I mean. And then we moved to St. James or Crestview, and I went to Alexander Ross School, which is now the Manitoba Center for the Deaf,
Okay.
which is almost by the racetrack. And so I went there for half of the last half of kindergarten up to sixth grade. And then when we did the instrument testing, I was meant to go to Ness Junior High,
Right.
which was actually, my dad was a guidance counselor at Ness Junior High at that time. I was going to go to his school, but I did the instrument testing at Ness. And then I think it was like in the spring, there was a situation a couple houses down from us that we knew about with this, people selling drugs and that in the house. And in the middle of the night, a car sort of careened out of control and went up onto our lawn and smashed into our brand new car. And the car sort of swung around and was like in the thing and was in the bushes. And then my parents were kind of like, okay, that's it, we're moving. So they ended up building a house in Charleswood, which is about half a mile away from Charleswood Junior High. So that was where I went to junior high. It was like the mid 80s. And then
Who was your band
like
teacher there?
Mark Waldera. Yeah, that was interesting to listen to. Not that I knew this already, but Cheryl Ferguson, took that gig because Mark eventually moved to Oak Park. And what was really cool was, we're getting way off topic here, but what was really cool was in 2013, I was the guest artist and adjudicator at the University of Mary in Bismarck, North Dakota, where I'd been an undergrad at their big jazz festival. And that was Mark's last year at Oak Park before he retired. And I got to adjudicate his band. And I got to stand on stage with his high school band and say, you know what? The most pivotal thing that happened to me in music education was this guy when I was in seventh grade, when we were starting jazz band, or stage band as they called it then. He said to everybody, bring in a big box of blank cassette tapes and I'll put some music on it. And I didn't know at the time. I think probably most people didn't actually do it, but probably a few did. But I was probably one of the only ones that spent a lot of time listening to them. I didn't know at the time, but there were Count Basie CDs, which was exactly what I would recommend any student to start listening to now, because in jazz, Count Basie is the sound of swing. That's how you learn the language of that music, by listening to Count Basie. It's like the regional accent of jazz was created by the Count Basie band. So I had this little thing, of course, what winters are like in Winnipeg, but I had it's -40 and I was in 8th grade delivering flyers, not even newspapers, but like, supermarket flyers. And you got like 2 cents per flyer or something. It was an obscene, almost like a sweatshop kind of job. But of course I had my headphones on and I listened to those Count Basie cassettes until they stretched out and I had to take new cassettes back and get the same ones put back on again. And now I know which albums they are, and I actually have them on iTunes and still listen to the same ones, however many decades later. But I was able to say to his students and to the audience, this guy, because of what he did, is responsible for me standing here. And it was his last semester teaching right before he retired. So that was 2013. So that was really kind of cool, because
How special is that?
I feel like, and he's really funny and modest. I don't know if you knew him at all, but he had a
little dry, right?
Yeah. He would always say, "Don't touch that. It's worth more than you are." right? Every time I would, even by the time I was in university or any time after, if I would ever say, thanks for what you did for me, he says, I can't take any, if I take any credit for the good people, I have to take responsibility for the bad people. So, I can't really attach myself to any of that. But he was a special teacher. He was a very um, good motivator.
And then you had Gary at Oak Park, you said?
Yeah. So then there were several moments, I think, where your perspective you look back and you realize you had no perspective, but your perspective was changed like immeasurably, where we were at Music Fest Canada, I think in my 9th year at Charleswood Junior High, but the Oak Park Band, this was in Toronto, that the Oak Park Band was playing. And that was a year where they had these absolutely spectacular soloists. There was this drummer, and in fact, a saxophone player who was eventually my girlfriend's brother, or she was my girlfriend's brother before, but you know what I mean. But they had these spectacular soloists, and it was just like for all you knew, this was like the greatest band ever, right? It was like, it might as well have been the Vanguard Jazz Orchestra from your perspective. And so it was just one of these moments where you knew you just had to go to that school. And it wasn't a given that you could even transfer districts. It depended on, you had to do an application, and it depended on numbers, and the principal basically had the final say as to who got to transfer and who didn't. And that, but that was really fortunate. If I hadn't gone to Oak Park, I probably wouldn't be doing anything I'm doing now. So, and I say that quite often, especially about Gary, because, he was a fantastic teacher, but there aren't that many people teaching high school who play on the level that he did. He was a constant sub for the symphony, and he did a lot of solo work, and he was a great piccolo trumpet player. And just to have him be able to demonstrate some things every day, and just sort of realize that, man, I play the same instrument as this guy, but listen to the control he has over it. And that's you need that, right? You need the exposure to that on a.
So would you say that
basis.
he influenced you a lot about going into music?
I think he didn't. I don't think he expected me to. I was always talking about being a lawyer until 11th grade. That was my plan, was to go to law school, and I thought that would be a cool gig. But then you kind of have this realization that, well, what am I doing in the evenings and the weekends anyway? Even now in high school, and it's not going to be any different if I'm in university. I'm not going to stop this music stuff, and if I get a job, this is what I'm going to want to be doing all the time. So maybe I'll try to find a way to make it work as my career. So it was sort of right around, and I think he was a little bit surprised when I said by my senior year, grade 12, that I was going to pursue music. But he was, certainly enthusiastic.
So were you studying with somebody privately at that point as well?
Yeah, so I studied with Blaine Workman. Actually, was my first trumpet teacher when I was in junior high. I remember going to his house, and he was the one who gave me the first thing I ever listened to was the Wynton Marsalis cassette of him playing the Haydn and Hummel trumpet concertos. So I heard Wynton play classical music before any jazz. But Blaine was good. I took with him for a year or two. And then I think he recommended, you remember Ken Austin was a trumpet guy who did some subbing with the symphony. He was an excellent teacher. He wasn't a jazz guy. Actually didn't have any real lessons with jazz specialists who really knew what they were doing. I mean, nobody pretended to either. I mean, it wasn't like they were trying to sell something that they couldn't do. But he was a fantastic classical trumpet player. One thing that, one thing that he did that has influenced my teaching so significantly, And I don't have any problem with what he did in the lesson, but he had one of those Ironman triathlon watches that with this, the stopwatch. And at the beginning of the lesson, now he taught out of Calvary Temple, which of course is way downtown, just off Donald Street or whatever. And you know where Oak Park High School is. It's like way out by the perimeter in Charleswood. So every day I'd have a lesson, and sometimes, of course, it's minus 35. I get on the bus. I take the bus from the school, transfer on another bus on Grant Avenue, take that bus all the way down to Donald Street, and then walk about 5 blocks to this lesson. Like I was reasonably committed. But he would start the timer when the lesson started at 29 minutes. It was a 30-minute lesson at first. And when the watch beeped, he would stand up and the lesson was over. And sometimes he was out the door so fast that
what does that do for your self-esteem?
He would say, well, he'd say, turn off the lights when you leave. He's got his coat on and I'm just still sitting there like, hold it. And I'm going, what, and you're not being shortchanged exactly, but I'm thinking, well, this isn't giving me the best vibe in terms of whether you actually care about what I'm doing or not. So even when I got into university and I had about 17 trumpet students in my third year of university, I'd always schedule my 30-minute lessons for 45 minutes. And then, I'd always go over. I'd always go right to the 45 minutes anyway, but I'd always have that buffer where they knew they're only paying for the 30 minutes, but I'm never going to make a kid feel like that. And so that was a really pivotal experience for me.
We need to have those, right? We need to have people that teach us how to teach and those who teach us how not to, so that we have that better understanding.
Well, it was just that one element of it too. Can't criticize.
No, but it's a big enough, when it impacts, when you're so young like that and vulnerable with you're putting yourself out there, you're going that extra mile, and to have somebody just be so like, nope, we're done. Not like there was no natural ending to your time together.
Right. And then it's like 5:30 at night. And in the winter, of course, it's super dark already. And now I'm on Donald Street. The comic book stores are already closed, so I can't even like hang out there. But I gotta find my way back to Charleswood on the bus. And so you got a lot of time to think about what just happened. And so that was just one of those experiences where it wasn't ideal. But then I took lessons for the last year and a half with Dave Shaw, who was a trumpet player in the Air Command Band. And he was fantastic. Like he was a fantastic player, but there was security at the gate because he actually lived on the base. So my lessons were on the base. So he had to actually come out to the gate to get me and take me in because, go through the security and that. And they had a rehearsal room that we had our lessons in. And man, we had 2-hour lessons for $15 or whatever at the time. Like he didn't care. And so that was a huge contrast. And he wasn't a jazz guy exactly either, but he was super enthusiastic about the things that I would bring in and that. And so he was my last teacher in high school. And that was, probably the most positive of the private teachers I'd had. And then I had another experience when, similar to hearing the high school band, the Oak Park band going, this is the greatest band I've ever heard. I was invited to go down to the University of Mary to their jazz festival in my 12th grade year and heard that band. Now I'd been in the University of Manitoba jazz band for 2 years in high school already. The first year in 11th grade, I was in the number 1 band, which was their only band at that point. And Wilf Jones was the teacher. And he was sort of just an adjunct teacher running the big band. But he was the band teacher. He was the jazz teacher at John Taylor, where my dad was a resource teacher. So my dad was very enthusiastic in a lot of ways about me, helping me out during high school and that. And so he and Wilf had lots of conversations about music and that. And Wilf helped me get my first and second trumpets when I was in junior high. And then by the time I was in 11th grade, he just said, you should come in. I can't remember whether the rehearsals were Tuesday night or Thursday night, but I'd drive my parents' car out to the U of M and be in that band. And So Jeff Johnson was like the lead trumpet player, and Randy King was a trumpet player soloist in the band, and Dale Bazan, who was was a saxophone player in the band. So that was really cool. I mean, that was considerably better than my high school band for sure. And then the second year, that's when Richard sort of took over, and he was running, I think, both of the big bands. And I was in this. I guess it would have been the second jazz band that met at night. I was in that my senior year in high school, or grade 12. And then, but then, based on Wilf's recommendation, he'd had a student. I don't know if you remember Jim Mayer.
Yep.
Jim Mayer was a guy from Silver Heights. He was about, I think he was 8 years older than me. And he'd gone to University of Mary in Bismarck, North Dakota, obviously in the 80s. And based on Wilf's recommendation, I went down to their jazz festival, and actually had an altercation at the International Music Camp the year before, when at the end of 11th grade, I almost got kicked out of International Music Camp. But I went down there to meet the jazz band director from University of Mary, went to the jazz festival and heard the band. And based on the fact that they had these incredible soloists, and that might as well have been the best band I'd ever heard at that point. So I was like, well, I need to figure out how to go to school there. So now you look back and you go, well, the band wasn't exactly as good as you thought it was, but
that's what you needed at that moment, right? That was your next level that you were going to strive for.
That's right. And that's all you know. Like, I think one of the things that I struggle with here as a teacher, or am focused on, is giving students a perspective. Because if you think of the idea of being in Winnipeg, Manitoba in the 1990s as a high school student, and even the idea of moving to Montreal was pretty daunting, right? Because we'd heard the McGill band was an incredible band back then, and but the idea of going to Manhattan School of Music or someplace in New York was just a fantasy. It didn't register that was actually a possibility. Whereas if you'd had the right teacher and they'd just given you the right information, it would have been much more possible and more natural. And there have been, since in the last generation of students, especially since what's happened with jazz at the University of Manitoba, there have been more students do that, right? Make that transition. It's not, maybe they're better, but they also have this perspective where it's just possible, where it just makes sense that they could actually do that.
Dave, do you get many international students in New Zealand at your university there?
We get more in classical music. There are quite a few. In fact, one of the problems at the university now is they're not allowing the Chinese students to come into the country. And that meant that there's like a $12 million budget deficit for the university this semester, because a lot of our students come from Asia. There aren't that many. I've got a doctoral student now that I'm supervising in jazz composition who's from Thailand. And it's really interesting because he did his master's degree in New Orleans and studied with Ellis Marsalis. And then he lived in Thailand, or was back in Thailand for a while. And he's got a job at the university sort of waiting for him. But they've told him, you need to go and finish this doctorate. And then you'll come back. And he's going to be one of the pioneers of jazz education in Thailand. And it's pretty cool.
That's brilliant.
I had a master's student who just graduated about a year ago from Virginia, and he'd been a guy I'd been in touch with for probably 8 years, teaching some composition lessons too, and that. So we've had a few, but generally the jazz students, we've only had a few, maybe like exchange students for 1 or 2 semesters from overseas. But generally our jazz students here are the ones that we nurture from high school. We're not going to get a big influx of international jazz students.
Right.
There'll be, here and there'll be a few.
So back to your university, so where did you go and what degrees did you end up with?
So I did, at University of Mary, I did Bachelor of Science, is called, in instrumental music education, which is, and we had the option to do a number of different sort of, they weren't even officially minors, but I studied composition and I studied jazz studies and conducting in that at University of Mary. And then it might have actually been the happiest day of my life was April 1st, 1996, when I got the letters from the University of Northern Iowa saying, you know, you've got a place as a master's student and a scholarship and a stipend. And the stipend was $6,000 for the whole year. And you would have thought that $6,000 for a year was like winning the lottery compared to being an undergraduate student and having like no money. But again, it was almost the exact same thing. The University of Mary Band in my 4th year at university was at the Elmhurst College Jazz Festival in Chicago. And, you know, you heard about 50 different university jazz bands. And then the University of Northern Iowa band came up and they just absolutely crushed the set. And it was like, you know, this is beyond, right?
So there's your next level again, right? Like you said.
So that's the next level. And so that's the next place you need to go to. And I met with the director from there. And he gave me a couple CDs of the band and we were back, you know, on the tour bus, 30 hours or whatever it was, back from Chicago to Bismarck. And I gave my director those CDs to listen to. And he came to the back of the bus. He says, you know, man, this isn't a good band. This is an effing great band. It was like, yeah. So, and I actually started out there as a classical composition major, but only for about a week because I was hired to be the jazz teaching assistant.
Right.
And then I just realized that this guy who ran the jazz program was just on a completely different level. And it took me about 5 minutes to realize that I should be doing my master's degree in jazz education or jazz pedagogy, it was a new degree. They'd only had it for about 3 years. And so I was I think, 3rd grad in that program.
So your master's is from there?
Yeah. So it was the same thing again. I was doing jazz education, but I was studying classical trumpet and doing jazz performance and doing classical composition and jazz arranging. So like sort of all these things at once.
Right.
And
then again, your doctorate is from where again?
Well, I had 5 years teaching high school in Winnipeg in between there. So then it was like, you know, what do I do? What do I do now? Well, it turns out I was married at the time for a short period of time. And we just decided, well, we're going to move back to Winnipeg. And then I started hunting for jobs. And very fortunately, I was actually a finalist for the job at John Henderson Junior High.
Really?
Which was the year that Jeff moved from John Henderson to River East.
Yeah.
And most people were scared to death of that job because there were 300 band kids and and he built it into this like kind of behemoth of like the quality of it ridiculous for a junior high band. But that didn't exactly work out. But then I was pretty quickly offered the job at Murdoch McKay in Transcona. And it was interesting perspective on that too, because I was sitting I had a fantastic principal. His name was Errol Harris. Well, it still is, but he's not a principal anymore. But he was in the job interview. I'm sitting in the main office of the school with 4 or 5 other people, all doing interviews at one at a time. And I'm sitting next to a woman, and she was going to go in right before me. And she's saying, "Oh, you know, this was 43."
So we're back for part 2. Gotta love the internet. I'm actually surprised that it didn't cut out a little sooner, being all the way from Winnipeg to New Zealand. So here we are, part 2. Dave Lisik, can you continue? You are coming back to Winnipeg to teach for 5 years. Tell us about that.
Right. So we got the part about not getting the job at John Henderson Junior High.
Yes.
And then I was hired at Murdoch McKay.
Right.
I remember being in the office where the interview was going to happen, And a woman who was interviewing for the job was really happy that the job was going to be only 43% because it meant she'd be home for lunch, and it wasn't going to be that it wasn't that good a program, so there wasn't going to be that much pressure. But when we went into the interview room, they had a whiteboard that said jazz band 6 or jazz band 7, and then junior concert band 12, and senior concert band 35. And they said, these are the numbers of students that are in our band program at the moment. I think they'd had a bit of a problem because the Collège Pierre Elliott Trudeau and Murdoch McKay are basically right. You can actually like jump from one door to the other.
Yeah, that's where my daughter's going next year.
Okay, so
yeah.
you know they're right next to each other, right? So Collège Trudeau had fewer students. Murdoch McKay was maybe 1,100. It was a pretty big high school, but for a while they didn't have a band program. So all the students from there were doing their band at Murdoch McKay. So that kind of kept that on life support for a little while, longer than it should have been. But then they hired Rob Monson to teach at Collège Trudeau, and of course then all those students just stayed there. So the numbers were pretty bad. So they said, well, these are our numbers. What do you think of this? And what are you going to do about it? I said, well, okay, so that jazz band number, we need 17 students to be in the jazz band. There have to be students who were in the band program before. There have to be people that I can find to make it 17 students in the first month. We'll fix that. The junior highs, the closest junior high school was, I'm gonna not remember. It's where Paul Graham is now. I'm not gonna remember the name of the school offhand, but they have a lot of band students. We're gonna need to do some things to help them make that program better, and then recruit more of those students. Because if we're only getting 12 students, but they have 300 band students, well, we've got a disconnect. So based on that sort of aggressive approach to what was about to happen, they hired me for that job, and it actually sort of happened that way. There were enough students that had either quit band or were in the system. I mean, I found a guy to play the bass who was a guitar player in a rock band, but he was cool and he was enthusiastic, and he was sort of rehabbing from a drug addiction, I think. And it was like, you want to learn how to play the bass? He's like, all right. And every day he came after school, and I gave him an hour bass lesson every day. And I said, well, you're in the #1 big band, like immediately, because I need you here. And we sort of made it work. And I taught a lot of free private lessons, for the first couple of years. In fact, so many that the principal after the first year was willing to give me 2 teaching sections for free just to teach lessons. So that was amazingly supportive on his behalf.
Nice to be valued like that.
It's because it doesn't happen all the time. And when he left, the vibe changed completely. And that was after 2 years. And then that had something to do with my interest in not wanting to keep doing that job. Because if the same guy had stayed there for 10 years with the level of support that he gave me, which was by any measure phenomenal, I don't know, I might not have left. So things went really well that first year. We were actually able to turn that around. We got an invitation to go to Music Fest for all of our bands that first year, from never having had that happen before. So, and we had quite a few students then decide that they were going to study music, and it was a really good, really positive time for me. I look back now and I would do almost everything differently, but I think I do things better.
But then everything that you did then leads you to where you are now, which is in a pretty great place.
Yeah. And I had a few conversations with some people about, just the prospect of being a university professor, and you have this idea in your head of what type of people have those jobs and how competent they are and how difficult it would be to actually get a job. And there's a guy, Rick Lawn, who was the director of jazz at University of Texas at that time. And he was the former director of jazz at Northern Iowa, where I'd done my master's degree. And we were back at Northern Iowa for the 50th anniversary of their jazz festival and just having a conversation. I think it was after my 3rd year of teaching. And I was just like, oh, it's just, it's so competitive, so impossible to get a job. And he's like, you just have to look at it as though it's a big jigsaw puzzle. Most people have, if it's a 1,000-piece puzzle, most people have 200 pieces. And then they stop putting the pieces together. And if you want this, you have to figure out what the pieces are. And then you have to start building them one at a time. And it's not going to happen in a month. You're not going to be able to practice enough trumpet to be that much better in a month. You're not going to write enough music to have an impressive portfolio in a month. It's going to take a long, long time. And you're not just going to be able to do one thing. You're going to get a job because you're able to do multiple things. And you just have to start. And it's not because you're more intelligent than the next person, or most people, especially ones who are, anybody who's gone through music education and learned to play all the instruments and become a pretty proficient player, then it's not about ability to do it. It's just about interest or passion for it or enthusiasm, and wanting to do that specific thing. And that really was that's sort of the philosophy that I've sort of lived by since then. Mm-hmm. You just get a little bit better all the time, and it doesn't all happen at once. So my ability to write music now compared to even 10 years ago when I moved here is significantly better, I think. But my ability to write music when I got this job is significantly better than when I started my doctorate or when I started teaching high school. Like at every stage, it's just there's been a significant jump, and it's a decision. So it's not, we look at people who, like I look at all these people who I am very fortunate enough to get to play my music now, who are the best players in the world. Donnie McCaslin and Chris Potter are 2 of the absolute best saxophone players ever to live. And Alex Sipiagin is one of the best, and Jeff Watts and Boris Kozlov and these people. I don't play, even now, I don't play jazz on the level that these people do. But they didn't always do that, right? They just decided to do it. Sure, they had advantages or they had right teachers, but they had perspective and they worked their butts off to get to that level. And so that's just a constant message that students need to hear. That,
so then would you say that conversation that you had with that one teacher again sort of sparked you to look beyond teaching high school again?
Yeah, I mean, it was on my very first week of being an undergraduate student at the University of Mary. They had just built a brand new building. In fact, we didn't really move into that building for about 6 weeks, but you got the sense, okay, wait, so this guy teaches jazz. He also teaches percussion, but that's his job. Like he's got this really nice office. He's got this $5,000 stereo. He can listen to music all day. He brings students in. If they don't practice, he kicks them out after 10 minutes. and this is his job. I can't imagine that there's a better job anywhere, right? And then when I went to my master's school, that was probably the most important lesson, was the contrast between teaching styles. There was, my undergraduate jazz band teacher was a little bit like the Whiplash guy, and it was, I think it was like post heart attack. I think he'd mellowed out considerably by the time I got there. But there were some stories about some things happening, and you realize that there were people who had this ability level, this arbitrary level. This is how good they are. This is how good they can make their students or their bands, just based on their ability. And then there are people who try to make their bands this much better by intimidating people and yelling at them and being super negative. And that actually works, right? That little bit, you do get that extra bump. But of course, that's not the recommended teaching strategy. There are no education
not
method book.
sustainable.
Right. That's right. Well, and eventually, you know what happened between the time that we were kids and the time now, or very recently, kids have been taught what bullying is, to stand up to it, and to talk to people about it. You can't get away with the same kind of crap that you could get away with back then.
No.
Right. And if you've had good experiences with good teachers, nor do you want to. So then I go to the absolute next year, my first year. Then I'm in a band, and the students in the band were maybe better, but they weren't exponentially better, right? It wasn't like the students in Bismarck weren't capable of being taught, or even the students at University of Manitoba weren't capable of being taught. Manitoba was producing more good band students per capita than anywhere I can imagine. But then you meet a guy who can take his, not here, but he can take his band to here without ever raising his voice, without ever demeaning someone. It's not like he was never irritated or upset or disappointed. Like, you could tell when he wasn't happy about things, but he wasn't abusive, and he got results that were greater than the sum of the parts of the students in the band, just by knowing what he was doing. He could hear everything. He was competent. He knew the styles. He knew the recordings. He knew how to get the band from nothing to here rather than here. And this extra little bit of the abusive part wasn't ever part of it.
No.
And so maybe the thing I'm most grateful for as a teacher is that understanding. Because if I'd been a high school band teacher immediately after my undergraduate degree, I think I would have taken a lot of bad lessons into the classroom. I even remember from my student teaching experience, I think that went reasonably well, but I think if I just continued on teaching high school at that point, man, it would have been a very different thing.
Yeah.
And like I said, I would do quite a few things differently. When I taught high school at Murdoch McKay for 5 years, and I would do some things differently now too, but I think that was the most important lesson that I ever learned. I still talk about that very often.
It's a great lesson. It's absolutely a great lesson. I mean, you see that everywhere, not just in the classrooms, right? But in any leadership roles, right? People that lead with fear and people that lead with competence and understanding, right?
Right.
So,
because they understand that the results aren't going to be better. Just because you are a hard ass doesn't mean that you're actually going to make it better.
No.
So being an inspirational figure, I mean, we're kind of dealing with that a little bit right now. I mean, like I said, the university is losing maybe $30 million this year, and they're going to have to try to deal with that. And the proposals that have come out so far are not that attractive in terms of, how they're going to try to save money. Yeah. And there are ways to inspire a group of people by saying, let's all band together and let's get this job done so we can recruit enough students or raise enough money to not have this be a negative thing.
Yeah.
Or you can just roll out all the negative stuff immediately, and then everybody is demoralized and deflated.
Exactly, in a time when we're all sort of not at our best, right?
Right. There's, no matter what your situation is, nothing's normal. So even if you've been affected the least, it's still reasonably stressful.
Exactly.
And if you've been affected the most, you can imagine. This is why you can imagine why people in America are upset enough to protest.
Yeah.
Well, I think in Canada they've done a lot of good things in terms of saying, well, we're going to try to protect your jobs or your income, at least for the very near future. And they've done that here as well. Exactly. But if you just say, well, you're on your own, we're going to shut everything down for months. Well, who can actually deal with that? Well, almost nobody.
No, exactly. So Dave, I've got to steer you to a different topic now, of course, remembering that this is a family show.
Right.
Do you have a little story for us, perhaps of one of the weirdest or strangest gigs that you've ever been involved in?
Yeah, there was one. I don't have actually very many disaster gig kind of stories, but when we were, I think it was my first year at the University of Northern Iowa, and even though that that year, those 2 years, the band was winning downbeat awards for having a really good jazz band in that. But even in that environment, you still need to recruit students, right? And when you're in Iowa has about 3 million people, so it's not a very big state, but has a very high level of music education. But so we're doing this little recruiting tour. There's a little town called Clinton, Iowa. And I think I just did a Google search on it the other day, and it was Google Maps thing. It's about close to 3-hour drive from Cedar Falls, where the university was. So you're going to take the jazz band, 17 students, and all the equipment. You had to rent like 3 of these, or the university owned them, but they had to take these 3 vans. And they were like these, I don't know, 17 passenger vans or whatever they were. And as one of the teaching assistants, I was driving one of the vans. The jazz band director was driving another van. And my friend, the guy who's still my friend, was the other teaching assistant, Eric. We actually have written a couple books together now. But so that's another story that I think somebody mentioned in one of your interviews the other day about the relationships that you have in school will continue to be relationships in a lot of cases. So they're super important. But anyway, there are 3 of us driving these vans. It's wintertime. Iowa still has winter. Not quite what Winnipeg knows, but still, it can still be -20 some of the time. So we're driving down the highway, a couple hours into the trip. And I think the jazz band director's van was first. My van was second. And then my friend Eric's van was the third one. But in the passenger seat of Eric's van was this trombone player who was a little bit overweight. He had this joke where he would, pull up his shirt and he would take a gigantic tuba mouthpiece and stick it in his belly button, and it looked like Dizzy Gillespie's puffy cheeks. Right? And so this is the kind of character that we're dealing with. So we're in the right-hand lane on a 2-lane, 4-lane highway, and we're driving down the highway. The third van then pulls up beside us. And this trombone player had pulled up his shirt, and he's like rubbing his sweaty chest all up against the window, right? And of course we're laughing. I was driving the van with the 5 trumpet players in it. No, trumpet players are kind of socially ostracized anyway. So we're in this van together. And then they pass us, and they go right up against the jazz band director's van. And so now the dude with his chest up against the window, and the jazz band director's looking at him, and he's got a funny laugh. He's probably going, right? Now this happens at the minute that we pass the overpass where the Cloverleaf turnoff is to go to Clinton, right? And they both vans miss it because they're doing this stupid thing where he's like distracting the director. They're laughing. It's kind of cute and funny. And we just go past it. And of course, the trumpet players are a bunch of cynical, negative guys. And we're going, did they see that? That was the sign, right? I mean, we had the map, like we discussed the route before we started. And well, I don't know. Are we going to tell them? What are we going to do? I don't care. It's not our business. Not our problem. I mean, so 30 minutes later, going down the highway, they pull off because they realize we've blown way past the turnoff, 30 minutes. So, they come back and they go, did you see what happened? I said, I don't know. We didn't know what was going on. You guys were showboating or whatever it was. So we had to drive back 30 minutes just to get back on the right highway. So we were an hour out of our way. So we didn't show up to the, we were playing at a high school auditorium for 3,000 students or something like that. And we missed the show by an hour and a half or whatever. So that was the worst experience.
That's wild. I had visions of I had visions of that mouthpiece getting stuck in his belly button or something. Like, oh God.
Well, that was pretty funny. I mean, you imagine, because, obviously Dizzy Gillespie with a small trumpet mouthpiece has these big cheeks, but kind of a fat guy with a tuba mouthpiece. Kind of looks like Dizzy Gillespie.
That is great. So now you've actually given us along the way of your story lots of advice for students who are going into music as a career. So I'm not actually going to ask you that because you have given so much little tidbits that have helped you along the way that I think people could get so much from that. So I'm going to ask you my last question. It's what are your little bit of words of wisdom during these weird times? Because again, you're living in a completely different country than we are right now, but what have you found have been the things that you've been leaning on to sort of get you through these bizarre times?
Well, like I said or I don't know if I said it at the beginning, might have been beforehand, but we had a baby that came home from the hospital on the day that the lockdown started. So, and it's our second baby. So you understand, and you know this, isolation or a quarantine or a lockdown compared to having a newborn is actually not that much different. There's a little bit, we haven't had anybody visit us because they couldn't, right? But in general, it hasn't been that much that difficult. But I think a lot of other people have sort of alluded to it, is that there are a lot of people who make music for a living who are in real trouble, like financial trouble. But at the same time, man, you can't downplay the effect that some of those people have had at helping people cope. And just the realization that if all this goes away, like all the creative outlets, or all the input that you have, not just music necessarily, but all of the things that happen that are creative, if all that goes away, if we just decide, okay, we're going to somehow, get back to normal, but all these people are not going to be able to do those jobs anymore, your life is going to be infinitely less rich. And hopefully we're going to be able to, I think you see positive signs in certain countries that we're going to be able to look at this and learn some lessons from it and rebuild things in a way that's even a little bit better than what it was. But in other cases, you're thinking, well, man, I have some friends who are in who might not actually be musicians anymore because of this. And we'll need to, it was coming to a head for a long time anyway, because like we were talking about releasing CDs. You release CDs online now. There's no way for those CDs to actually make any money. Spotify and Apple Music and that, I mean, they pay money for sales or for streams, but only in theory, right? It actually doesn't make any impact financially because it's so little. And that model that used to exist for making music and getting paid an amount of money where you could actually even live a modest lifestyle was kind of evaporating. And so something needed to be done to fix that anyway. And now this has just sort of pushed it right off the cliff.
Yeah.
And I started a record label a couple of years ago, and we've got, I'm releasing albums for people, and right off the bat we go, well, we know we're not making any money. I don't have any secrets or any insight into how to do this better than anybody else. All we can do is try to create a community and cross-pollinate a little bit. You send people to this website, maybe they see your album, they see my album,
then
but
they
I
can
actually
do
don't have
shows or whatever, right? And sort of help generate a living that way.
Yeah. Well, and I don't even have any, when you say a living, like I can't even begin to promise any amount of money. I can promise some interest, maybe.
Yes.
Like get more people interested in your music, but I don't know, how do you get people to pay for it? I don't know. We're just those of us who have jobs, teaching jobs that mean that you can put out your weird music and not have to worry about that constituting your income. That was a thing that happened quite a while too. I think there was a really famous, a very pertinent quote in Downbeat magazine where they said, getting a university teaching job is the new record contract. And you see that now. There's been, since we were kids, famous people, other than maybe at Manhattan School of Music, where some famous people taught adjunct lessons, famous world-class jazz musicians didn't teach college. And you almost had it was difficult to separate those people. Like I remember, Trent Kinniston was this guy who was a tenor player, taught at the University of Western Michigan, and he did some Michael Brecker transcription books. And when you're a kid, you know, you don't really separate the guy who did the transcription book with the guy who played the solos necessarily. But when you get a little bit older, you realize that, well, these guys were good musicians, no question. If they were teaching at big universities in America, but they weren't the guys who were making the marquee records. And now that's not true. Now almost everybody has a job in a university if they're, you know, big name people. And
well, they found a way to make it work to make a living, right?
right, by necessity.
Yep.
Because a generation ago they were able to not do that, and they were able to play enough and make records. The records could make money. You could actually make a year's salary by selling a record not too long ago, but not anymore. So that model needs to be reconstructed.
Well, hopefully, again, like through all of this, there's time to learn how to be creative and rethink how to be, not that again ever it's really that profitable, but again making a living as a musician in different ways. Hopefully, again, as you said, necessity will add some extra incentive there.
Right, and it won't go away because people won't allow it to. Everybody knows that you need it. It's always been the case that musicians just dive headfirst into a career because there's nothing else for them to do. They've just not that they couldn't do anything or there's nothing else, but for them,
that is what they do.
I can't imagine myself doing anything else is the attitude, right? So they just do it no matter what. I'm going to try to make it work. My life is this, so this is what I'm going to do no matter what the consequences. Yeah. And that will always be the case. And it will always be the case that people need to take in that creative output as well. So people will figure it out. And in countries that care about these things, it's when comparisons to the Great Depression and even the economic downturn 10 years ago or 12 years ago or whatever, the way that a country like Canada has handled taking care of people compared to 100 years ago, there's no comparison, right? If there aren't going to be bread lines and people starving and 40% unemployment or whatever, regardless of the economic, some of the detrimental economic effects, people are going to be taken care of to a certain level, to a humane level.
Yep.
And that's social progress. I mean, there are a few countries in the world that are the models and for social progress, and that's the best that humanity has ever done. And you know, a couple of the Scandinavian countries and Canada and New Zealand, those countries are doing better. They're not doing perfectly. And there's a lot to fix.
Yeah, there are definitely some highlights. Dave, we are
doing better than anybody's ever done before.
We are so proud to have you be a product of Manitoba Music Education, to see what you're doing and to really celebrate where you came from. It's wonderful. We hope to have you back one day, but we also understand that you're doing amazing things in New Zealand and really spreading joy through jazz music education there. It's brilliant to see.
Well, I owe everything that I've got to the fact that system was in place, because if it hadn't been, I'd be doing something completely different, because I didn't, like I said at the beginning, I don't have that. I didn't have the uncle or the parents or the whoever to say, here, just do this. Now I feel that way about my kids too. If my kids want to do music, my wife is a drama teacher and a dancer and that, and if our two daughters want to do any of those things, they'll be fine, because we'll be able to, in spite of the school system, we'll be able to make sure that they've got the right opportunities. But if they want to do something that's completely different, where we don't have that expertise, well, then it depends on the school system to prepare them for that.
Right.
And obviously it can't prepare for every discipline.
Oh, and then you just hope that your school systems are there to nurture your kids how they want to be nurtured, right? The field that they want to go into. So, but at least then you have the insight to know how to find resources, right?
Right. Well, and you also know, I mean, I kind of have an idea of what Manitoba public school teachers are getting paid now. And it's, you might complain about it, but it's actually pretty good, right? It's actually, it's a comfortable existence where you know that your compatriots south of the border are not in the same position.
It's a whole other ball of wax, right there, for sure. No, I'm very lucky to be in the profession that I am in, for sure. So.
Well, and somebody made that decision and continues to make that decision, that this is at least, it's valuable enough. And I say this, the contrast between the two jobs was, if you ever watch David Letterman, every time a teacher was on David Letterman, you know, he'd go and do his like, name your cuts of meats little bit or whatever in the audience. And every time there was a teacher, they would say, oh, God bless you for being a teacher, because we know that that's the most thankless job and you're run off your feet and you're not paid very much money. That's the American attitude towards education.
Yeah.
And in Canada, and the difference, even when I was a high school teacher, was maybe the difference of $10,000 or $20,000 a year. Difference might be a little bit more now, but the attitude was, oh, you're the teachers, you're the guys who get 2 months off in the summer. You know, there's almost like, that's a pretty good job. And there's, you know, it's obviously not universal, and you could probably name a bunch of ways that, you know, you don't feel 100% respected as a teacher by whoever, but you know
we're
that
still, I think we're treated quite well here, right? There's many things that we wish we could change, but yeah, this is the only place I'd ever want to teach.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I wouldn't, no, if I was going to teach high school again, I dream about that here a little bit, because I'm thinking, you know, I'd love to take over a high school program here for 2 years and just fix it and go, no, everything you guys are complaining about.
Add some Manitoba in there.
Right. Everything you say can't be done, I could fix pretty fast, because, and not because I'm better than everybody else, but everybody that I went to school with got the same training and the same ability. You don't have to be, and I often say the worst teacher in Manitoba, the worst band teacher in Manitoba, at least has this level of training. They're above this line, you know? And then of course, it doesn't mean everybody's exactly the same. There are outstanding ones, but at the very least, they have a level of professionalism. It's like that joke about, what do you call the person who finishes last in their class at medical school? Doctor.
Yeah.
Right. They still have a job.
They're still a doctor.
And you can't have the worst medical school graduate killing people. They still have to be competent.
Exactly. You set the bar at a certain height on purpose.
Right. Right. So then the students in Manitoba can, at least, no matter what high school you go to, can still say, well, I had the opportunity to play in a band and my teacher knew these things and could teach me to a competent level.
Yep.
And if I say that a lot here about, if it was math or physics or chemistry or biology or English, if it was being taught the way the music is being taught in some schools, then there would be a national emergency and they throw $1 billion into it, and they would recruit people from overseas and they would do massive retraining sessions. But because it's music, and that's what's cool about Manitoba. When you went to university, if you took band and jazz band and choir in high school, I'm sure it's the same way as 17 years ago, but you could use those as university entrance courses.
Yep.
Because
absolutely.
there was respect for those classes.
Yep.
They weren't extracurricular. They weren't just, something we do for fun. We take this seriously, and the results are clear, I think, because of those decisions.
Absolutely. Dave, I've got to let you go. I wish we could talk for hours upon hours. I know your day is just starting there.
Yeah, it's about 11 o'clock now.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I've got dinner on the table waiting for me. Dave, it's been amazing catching up. I hope that you come back to visit sometime soon, so we can get the whole gang back together and get out and do some recruiting.
Yeah, you want to go back and do some of that?
That could be fun. Those poor kids.
It certainly was. That was a good job.
Yeah, absolutely. Dave, all the best to you and your family, and yeah, take care in all this chaos.
Oh, great. Thank you. I appreciate this.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.